Bryan Parnham graduated from Virginia Commonwealth University in 2013. He was awarded the Core Fellowship at Penland School of Craft in 2016. Parnham has been a resident artist and lecturer at various universities and institutions across the country and abroad. He was a resident artist in Cortona, Italy in 2020, and featured in the Museum of Art and Design show Mad About Jewelry in 2022. He was recently awarded the prestigious Art Jewelry Forum Young Artist Prize at Munich Jewelry Week in 2024, and is currently pursuing new work as a full-time artist. So without further ado, Bryan Parnham.
Melissa stole all my thanks. I was going to thank all the same people that she did. Melissa and Josh, thank you so much for inviting me, for facilitating a great workshop. Thank you everybody for being here tonight. Thank you everybody for being in class for the past day and a half. I hope you had as much fun as I did. I'm going to start my timer so I don't keep us longer than we need. Most of this evening we're going to talk about the synthesis project, which is an upcoming endeavor that I'm going to be engaged in the next couple years, hopefully. But very briefly, for anybody that wasn't in the classroom with us for the past couple of days, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the process that we've been talking about. My work involves etching metal with a material called Pure Etch. This is the brand name of the product. It's a high-resolution drying photopolymer film. It's applied to a substrate, in my case, usually sterling silver. It's exposed to an ultraviolet light source using a transparency and ultraviolet light, and then it's developed and heat treated in order to create what I call a binary resist. So there's either, you're left with either photopolymer on the surface of the metal or it develops away. So on the left side, this diagram is like a bisected view. So the brown portion of that represents the substrate. The purple and blue represents the photopolymer, and the black dotted line would be the negative or the positive, the transparency that sits on top. And that whole stack goes into an ultraviolet light source, and whatever the light hits hardens, and everything in the shadow of that transparency remains soft, and that's what develops away. Super speed. This is the substrate, zinc. This is the photopolymer applied with distilled water. It's squeegeed away and then dried to remove excess water. And then it's developed with a chemical process, and you're left with a layer of plastic covering some parts and not others. So this allows you either to etch that metal, and that's what I do, or another possibility for this material is this could become a print matrix, so that could be inked and run through a press as it is without etching. So this image on the right is what that plate ended up as. So after it's at that stage, I etch it and then continually treat it with paint and patina and lacquer in order to express the image that's been dissolved into the surface of the metal. Portions of this process are, let's say, borrowed or found in various media. Obviously, I'm using it in a metalsmithing practice. We've been in the jewelry studio working on this. The substrate that I'm using it on is metal. In printmaking, this material would be used, say, if you were printing a magazine or something, there would be enormous rolls that this photopolymer would be on, and it would be processed by a machine, and it would mechanically print pages using all of this same process. As well, the imagery that I'm using is photographic, so I find this to be a direct connection to photography. And the fourth thing I have listed here sort of represents its relationship to painting, which in my mind is connected to shifting scale. So this photopolymer process is not limited to the scale of the objects that I'm going to show today. It's something that can be made, as large as you can really imagine it. title of this workshop, I don't know if it was even printed anywhere, but from me, the title of this workshop is Photopolymer as a Means of Synthesis. And this brings me to the synthesis project, which is predominantly going to be a teaching tour that I will hopefully schedule dates that'll span at least a year at universities around the country. I'm going to be teaching this process and treating the tour like a rock band would. I'm going to make cool graphic t-shirts, and there's going to be tour dates on the back. I'm going to have a merch table and bring my friends along as roadies, and I'm going to sell t-shirts and hats and koozies and cool stuff you would get from a concert. But I also want to have a book that will go along with this. So as I teach it, I'll have a book with a collection of the technical data and procedures, along with images of a body of work exemplifying the process, and a collection of essays. And the essays will emphasize the shared territory between the categories of printmaking, photography, painting, and metalsmithing. My work has existed in the labeled center of this pedaled diagram. I've been working and operating in this space for several years, thinking about it consistently and trying to actively synthesize aspects of this, of each of these categories. And I want to do this tour to share that with initially my community of metalsmiths, but I would like it to be something that's influential to all fields and bridges gaps between these four categories. I think the active synthesis is, I think it's applicable to these categories, but I don't want it to be for these categories specifically. I'm thinking of it more as a methodology by which any category might be synthesized. And if this first tour goes well, I would like to repeat it. I want to begin with material and talk about processes and materials, and then I want to move more into ideas and theory and talk about craft, fine art, and design as sort of the holy trinity of creative fields. And if a second tour is possible, and I'm able to do that, this is sort of life's work possibility, years and years down the line. And if I can do it a third time and have a third book, I would love to build up to the subjects that I find most interesting, which would be very big, very broad ideas about the shared territory of art, science, religion, and philosophy. So in the spirit of beginning with something simple and building slowly up to more complex ideas, I'm going to keep this four-pedaled Venn diagram sort of squared out a little bit in order to have some more space. And I'm going to begin with some commonly used metals and how they are used in each of these media. And I'm going to talk about some processes, and then there's going to be a pretty chaotic, quick timeline of how these media are related to one another. And we'll move on to more looking at the work after that. So the material I use most is silver, and you can see that it is in the shared space between photography and metalsmithing. It was a big realization to me to come across the fact that most darkroom photography relies on silver nitrate. And I got this idea in my head that a darkroom photographer operating that way is as much a silversmith as I am. And that's my training, that's where I'm rooted. And I felt as if I weren't meeting that title by only working in silver at this certain stage in its development. I felt I should be able to chemically silversmith as well as solder and build with it and whatnot. Copper finds itself in the center, shared by all of these media. In the Renaissance, copper was a substrate to be painted on. Tin types have been put on copper. Obviously, we use it in metalsmithing. It's a print matrix for printmaking. Intaglio would be a use of copper in there. And for sake of time, there's more of these, but we're going to add the next layer of processes. So movable type is a good example. Without the developments of lost wax casting and metalsmithing, we would not have the movable lead type that was cast with the same process in order to exchange ideas with the printing press and send it around the world. Another process that I wanted to point to specifically was Niello. It's an archaic material not often used anymore because it was this really nasty tar-like derivative of mercury that would be rubbed into incisions or etched lines in metal in order to create a contrasting color to whatever it was, the base metal. Which could be steel, this could be jewelry, it could be armor, something like that. And this is a predecessor to the idea that we could instead rub ink into those lines and then transfer that onto paper. Some more of these, I'm going to move through here a bit quicker. With a timeline, this is going to be super fast. Metalsmithing is so intrinsic to our development as humans that we were naming our earliest civilizational developments on the materials that we could use and the tools that we could make from them. So after Stone Age, Bronze Age, and Iron Age. And as soon as we were able to make tools with those metals, we were decorating them. So armor with etched designs or jewelry that is being engraved. All of the craftspeople who were working in the decoration of these metal objects, as soon as the printing press was invented, those craftsmen in the blacksmithing studio or in a jeweler's studio were transitioned into being engravers and intaglio craftspeople in the printmaking field. And as soon as we have printmaking, we have a relationship developing between painting and printmaking, whether that is making prints as reproductions of painting or painters using printmaking as a tool to assist the production of their paintings. There is a relationship that develops, and these two will be like the perfect examples of that, known as well for their prints as they are their paintings. That's Albert Dürer and Rembrandt. An artist using a painter using tools to assist their painting continues with the development of technologies. So with the metal tools available, we both have the housing and the tools used for grinding lenses, as well as mirrors, which would be another development of metalsmithing. In an early optical tool called the camera lucida, and this would be used by, we'll say speculatively used by someone like Vermeer. I know there's some people who don't buy into that idea, but he was using this tool, the camera lucida, speculatively to capture more realistically instances of light. And that sentiment, along with the construction of this camera lucida tool, is essentially camera. Louis Daguerre, famously one of the people working on the development of early cameras. Adolph Martin, a little bit less notable, but or less celebrated, we'll say. He developed the tin type ultimately, but his motivation was not to create a portable, permanent, monetarily accessible, economically accessible photograph, which is what he ended up doing in the tin type. His initial motivation, which he also succeeded at, was to make a temporary photograph onto a substrate that could be engraved by someone in a printmaking studio. He was, his motivation behind his research was in order to allow a printmaker to trace lines of a photograph of either a scene from life or a painting. So you can kind of get the sense that this timeline is spiraling towards the center and becoming more and more involved in all of these fields. And it continues to do so. I've got two more of these stages and then we'll move on. Nietzsche and Fox Talbot, both early names in the development of photography, and these two were as much interested in developing a way to mechanically reproduce a photograph as they were interested in developing ways to take unique photographs. And that mechanical reproduction way would be what we call photogravure. And we're going to come back to this process in a little bit more detail later on. Printmaking process utilizing photographic techniques in order to reproduce pictures with printing press and ink on a metal substrate. And this is the last one I got, but obviously this timeline continues today with more and more people using more and more of these processes together. Louis de Curon was one of the early contributors to colorizing what at that point had been black and white film, and did it in the most printmaker way possible. He divided these colors into 3 processes. It had been happening in printmaking, and he replicated that idea chemically in order to colorize photographs. He was part of a movement that was interested in making photography more like paintings, surprisingly. So we might think that color photography is more like our experience of the world, and maybe the motivation towards color was only to get things to look more like the way we see them. But at the time, photography was competing a little bit and trying to reach the same expressive ability that painting held. So his motivation was as much involved with printmaking as it was with painting. So we have a little bit of factual content, and now with that groundwork, I'm going to give you some opinions. Why is this important? A postmodernist thinker might say that our culture today is in a state of being fractured. And depending on who you talk to, this might mean a few different things, but to my understanding of it, historic societies have been in various degrees of open and closed states. An open culture might have lots of trade, very free exchange of ideas, and a closed culture would be concerned with their borders, and they would be concerned with maintaining their ideas internally. What we have today is a strange and specific combination of both. It seems as if we have an open culture with international travel and exchange of ideas. We have a global marketplace, but underlying this apparently open culture are pockets of very closed culture. And this would be what you might consider maybe like a bubble. We've all heard about people having their bubbles, and their algorithm is only telling them information from inside their bubble. I think the synthesis of disparate media, we're going to take this as a bit of a metaphor, but the synthesis of disparate media is, in my opinion, a remedial act to the fracturing of culture. One aspect of this fracturing is our educational system is focused on specificity. So if you are doing the thing like I'm sure all of you are, and like I did, I went to school to be a metalsmith, and I received all of the professional biases that were given to me by that specified education. It's unavoidable, but when you move into a different media that you were not professionally trained in, you are more able to recognize your own biases and the biases of the other field, which gives you the opportunity to decide whether they are or are not valid. I hear far too frequently that there's nothing new under the sun, and perhaps in rigidly defined media, that might be the case. But in shared territories and in between different categories of media, there is limitless potential of combination. And if you find yourself in a place that is shared territory or in between categories, there's no competition there. So nobody is doing the thing that I'm doing in the way that I have uniquely combined it. I see all of this as a practice of empathy. The more you know, the more you know. So operating in a field that is not entirely comfortable to you, you get to know more about that field, and by comparison, you get to know more about yourself and your own field. Inside these bubbles of culture, and in terms of fracturing, there tends to be loops where an idea gets digested over and over and over, and it becomes a bit cannibalistic. Particularly in jewelry, I find personally that I've been making jewelry for jewelers for a long time, and this seems to be the way that it's a bit cannibalistic and incestuous, and these loops happen over and over And I think finding inspiration and operation in other media is a way to exit these loops. Lastly, the more fields you operate in, the broader your impact will be. From here on in, I'm going to move through these 4 categories and talk about how my work in particular has developed in relationship to each of them. So, beginning with pink metalsmithing, I was educated at Virginia Commonwealth University. I initially was intending to be a furniture maker, so I took introduction and intermediate classes in wood. Eventually moved to ceramics, same intermediate and introductory classes in that, and found myself eventually in a metals program. I was attracted to metals because it had the most diversity of tool use. Say in clay, the potter's wheel is made to spin clay into pots. That's what it's designed for, and that's really the thing that you can use it for. The jeweler's saw can cut anything that it can cut, and so there's much more opportunity to use disparate materials. And it was really the second half of the name of this program that I found most interesting. The craft wasn't as interesting to me, but the fact that I was doing material studies, that felt engaging. And I can't imagine VCU really named it that for any legitimate reasons other than maybe diplomacy or to attract a student who might be doing material engineering and get their classes crossed or something. But that's what I was most interested in. And I made nothing good in undergrad, but I did make this ring, which is exemplary of the sort of place my mind was at, thinking of multiple materials. And this was as many different materials as I could get my hands on, all pinned together in one ring. So being primed for this interdisciplinary thinking, I continued my education at the Penland School of Crafts, which I can't recommend highly enough to anybody who is interested in taking classes in the summer or after you graduate, furthering your education. It's in the mountains of North Carolina, and they have every studio you could think of. Paper making, book binding, sewing, weaving, dyeing, glass blowing, metalsmithing, blacksmithing, woodworking, and it just goes on and on and on and on and on. I spent 3 years there working and taking classes full time. And outside of that, I spent many more years. I have a great community there and get to continually visit again and again. But at the time I spent there, I was introduced to etching copper. And this may be like the second plate that I ever etched. And it's kind of the birth of more of the work that we're going to look at. While I was at Penland, I was being very metalsmithy, and I was making small, shiny, well-designed objects that I hoped would make me a living. Outside of that, I was making studio work that was more complicated, hoping to impress and get the admiration of my peers, doing very traditional techniques in hopefully modern ways. And at a certain point, I became more interested in the formal elements of the things that I was making than maybe the actual medium that I was working in. So something like this, the geometry was more exciting to me, and what the geometry meant was more exciting than what it actually became. So I was more interested in doing something that made metal expressive, and I wanted it to be graphic, which leads me to photography. Still at Penland, the Penland Gallery had a exhibition of alternative process photography. It was a group show. There was many people represented, and they made Polaroids and chemograms and tintypes and all sorts of images made of all sorts of materials. And it was at this moment that I really had the idea, which seems obvious, that photographs are made of stuff just as much as jewelry is made of stuff. We look at the cognitive content of a photograph, but it is material just as much as any other craft is material. 2 artists in particular that made this apparent to me. On top, Al the Fish, who was doing print transfers, digital print transfers onto patinaed aluminum, and Bettina Speckner, who I'm going to mention several more times because she's very influential to me. She had found print plates, etched photographs in zinc that were captured like stone in a brooch. So I was captivated by this idea that I need to be a chemical silversmith as much as I need to be a material silversmith. So I learned to shoot 35 millimeter and develop film. I started looking at digital printing and ways that I might alter digital prints. I was looking for any way that I could find that a photograph would become more material to me. I was making drawings based on photographs, and then I was making prints based on those drawings and altering them in successive layers. And ultimately, that study and research led to a small series of brooches. These are etched copper that are painted and sanded, and it's called a DOS transfer, so digital print transfer onto these brooches. This would be like maybe 2.5 inches square each. Not an original intention. People have been making jewelry that is engaging in photography for a long time. In particular, there was a wonderful show that culminated in a book at the Museum of Art and Design in New York that emphasized the relationship between jewelry and photography, with Heislocker on the far left, Kyodzlik Sim in the center, and again, Bettina Speckner on the right. Kyodzlik Sim, I think, is doing what I was most interested in emulating, which is building bridges between media. I think a photographer could look at this camera and find as much value in it thinking about metalsmithing as a metalsmith could look at this and find value thinking about photography. So in the process that I described in the beginning, I found my way to etching photographs directly into metal and fabricating them into brooches. So this series was called Punctum, and if this was the same slideshow I normally do, I would be speaking almost exclusively about this body of work and the conceptual integration of photo theory. I think you can find some of those talks through our jewelry forum if anybody's interested in it. We also have hopefully some time for questions at the end. I'm going to continue moving through to printmaking because this was the medium that got me from metalsmithing to what I had found my intention as in photography. So early on, I was using fairly traditional printmaking intaglio techniques to etch either copper or silver. But I found that I couldn't really get beyond line work. And what I was interested in was something that had more subtlety like a photograph. So yet again, we have another Bettina Speckner brooch. This is another reused print plate that is photographic in nature, but it is a sheet of zinc that's been etched. And you can see this gridded dot pattern is what's called halftone. And converting a continuous tone photograph into halftone allows you to etch it into a piece of metal or burn it into a silk screen. And this was the method that I latched onto as the initial way in which I was going to create photographs in metal. This gives you just a sense of, this is a 3x3 inch sheet of silver. You can tell how digital it is on the left. These dots are fairly blocky and large. And at a jewelry scale, they become quite apparent. This was maybe the first brooch I ever made in this process. It might be 2 inches tall, maybe 1.5 inches. And those dots are, especially blown up at this scale, you can really see those dots. And what I was interested in was achieving higher resolution, but it's not only the resolution, it's really the presentation of that resolution, because at 2 inches in scale, it does one thing, but at 8 feet in scale, it does another thing. This is made of the entirely same resolution, but it's a several hundred times larger. This is the work of Peter Cochran. He's a photographer who saw the research that I was doing and was interested in having his work made in my process. And I had really no confidence in the process at the time, but I wanted to find out how scalable it was. And so I ended up getting to do that research and being paid for by producing these pieces. But what I was interested in was having the effect of this, how smooth and gradient oriented and tonal the image is at this scale. I wanted to have that on a jewelry scale, and really the solution is photogravure. Of photogravure, Wikipedia says, the process was important to 19th century photography, but by the 20th century it was only used by some fine art photographers. By the mid-century it was almost extinct. And this is true. It's a very difficult and finicky process, and the expertise of this process are trapped in very small bubbles. There's too many boundaries of too many categories for me to access the information to achieve this printmaking process in order to replicate photographs. So what I wanted was to move from the resolution I had, halftone, on the left. I was making work at about 80 dots per inch. That's a detailed image of a print made with halftone. On the right is a print made with photogravure, which is a continuous tone process. So without actually learning to be able to do photogravure, I wanted to get my dots to be as small as possible to emulate this consistency. And it was only this past summer that I was able to achieve it. I've been working for the past year and a half to get from the resolution I had, about 80 dpi, to the resolution I have now, which is 600 dpi, and it's repeatable and reliable, and it works. If you follow the instructions, it works every time. This is absolutely brand new, so I have only completed one image to the scale of a brooch. This is 3 inches by 3 inches, but it has all of the qualities that I've been striving for. The odd man out of this 4-petal Venn diagram is painting. And I think that's because we don't really think of it so much as a craft, perhaps, and it's maybe not materially oriented in the same way others are, but I think it's present in all of the others, being that when I was a kid, I thought an artist was a painter, and so I've always kind of thought of things in terms of paintings. I really don't want to make anything at the scale of a piece of jewelry that wouldn't also work at 6 feet tall. So in many ways, I've been kind of standing in the dark trying to figure out a way to get metal to be a painting, and these are some early tests at it. These are, I think, like maybe 6-inch square sheets of steel that I drew on with a hammer and chisel, and then added layers of paint and patina to develop the drawing. Another one of those is maybe like 2 by 2.5 feet, something like that. These paintings were made with sheets of aluminum that I painted solid colors and then cut up and puzzled back together in order to create the images. So before I even got to etching, this was the motivation, to use metal in order to make something that was like a painting. The very beginning of teaching myself to use photopolymer, I had access to a printmaking studio, and they used predominantly nitric acid. And I had a lot of cheap sheet steel, which means I could make bigger things. So some of the first attempts, my technique was deplorable. The images were not very clear, but ultimately I was, in the very beginning, trying to make these objects out of metal that were somehow photography, somehow printmaking, somehow painting all together. There's some more of these, a bit larger scale. You can see that that's not intentional. That's just me not knowing what I was doing. I was trying to figure it out as I went. So, this is the beginning, and I would like to really return to making work like this, big picture that are also kind of like paintings. Some more of these. The use of color, I have not perfected yet. This is a matter that I'm still doing research on. These are 2 brooches that I was able to successfully include color. The pigment on the surface is nail polish. It works with these sort of broad, solid colored sections, but I'm more interested in gradients and subtlety and having the freedom that a painter does when they're engaging with a canvas. So that's more research to do, not exactly there yet. That concludes the 4 petals, and I have some projects that are not exactly oriented within those 4, so I'm just gonna have a couple bonus items. This is another piece that is metal cut up and pieced back together, but it's made out of all the failures that I had when I was etching those larger sheets of steel. I went ahead and painted them and sanded and painted them anyway, cut them up and put them back together in sort of the technique that would be called pietradura, which would be like marquetry of stone, like chopping up stones traditionally, kind of as a Renaissance technique. I think we have some people doing animation, some animation students in here. This one's for you. It doesn't really apply so much to the conversation at hand, but I made, I think, 8 pairs of earrings that were each a frame of animation, and so I photographed those and strung them together as a gift. This piece is a foot by a foot, and the majority of the images is a sheet of etched zinc to look like a tile floor, and there's a fabricated silver brooch in the center that can be put on and taken away, and the rest of the operates sort of like housing as it disappears back from the tile. Satisfying action, but some of those brooches of the Puncto series that I showed, there is a number of other series sort of contained in the same aesthetic processes. Those one of them is called stacks, where it's taking 3D models, flattening them in different perspectives, and then collaging them together digitally. Utilizing digital space to do things outside of my expertise is a whole lot of fun. So I can be a sculptor, I can carve stone if I want, because I have these tools I'm going to operate in the fields of photography. These were from a series called Veneer, where I was taking publicly accessible 3D models from the SketchUp archive, and I was flattening them, and then taking sampled photographs of a material and piecing them together and inventing the shadow, sort of a combination of sculpture and collage and painting digitally. These are brooches as well. And the most recent series of work that I've been making are altered mirrors. So what appears to be the dark parts of the image of the sculpture is a reflective surface. And then it's back painted white. So when reflected against a white surface, it almost disappears entirely. And when reflected against a dark surface, it's very visible. Another one of those is 3 inches across, also a brooch. This is a black one. They operate quite differently in different lighting conditions. Man, I'm doing great on time. I don't have that many slides left. I kind of want to sort of wrap this up and summarize it a little bit. This is the emblem for the synthesis project. And I have a couple, I drew it, but I've got a couple issues with it that they might need to be remedied. My work is synthesizing these 4 categories, and that's represented by the arrow coming down from the center. This arrow is unidirectional, where I think there might need to be an arrow on both sides of it, because what I really want to do is synthesize parts of these fields, bring them down to myself and my work and my research, but then I want to give it back. The whole idea of doing this teaching tour is to do work in these fields, develop ideas, and then give them back, hopefully, to promote broader thinking for everybody, for everybody's benefit within those fields. Another issue I take with my own design is the fact that these categories have hard borders. This might be the state of these media today, but what I would like it to be is something more like this, something like the blending of colors, something like the probability field of an electron around an atom, something of a gradient out from the center. And this is hopeful thinking, but I'm more of an idealist than I am an optimist. So really what I want in my heart of hearts is that there is no spatial temporal difference between any of these fields. They exist concurrently, they're all the same thing, and I hope that we can continue to approach them that way. And this is just hopefully an introduction to beginning to think in that regard. So that's the end of it. Thank you very much.